The rich gunslinger's prized stallion pawed at the dusty earth, nostrils flaring like a wild tempest, refusing its master's command. The sun bore down mercilessly on the cracked plains, yet no man's hand had ever dared tame this indomitable spirit. Today, standing at the edge of the corral, a young Apache boy stepped forward, eyes steady beneath the brim of his worn hat, contemplating the silent challenge that simmered between man, beast, and untamed freedom. The sprawling ranch lay isolated beneath a vast, cloudless sky, where the relentless wind swept restless against sun-baked soil, carrying with it the faint scent of mesquite and sagebrush. Beyond the horizon, rugged mesas cast long shadows over the restless plains, while silence hung heavy, broken only by the occasional creak of weathered wood and the distant call of a lone hawk. Here, in this unforgiving stretch of the frontier, life balanced precariously between survival and surrender. The gunslinger, withered by countless battles and whispered legends, bore the weight of pride and exhaustion. His eyes, sharp, yet clouded by a persistent weariness, traced the wild horse's every move. This beast was more than muscle and mane. He was the embodiment of wildness itself, a mirror to the gunslinger's own restless soul. Nearby, the Apache boy's presence was quiet but resolute, a harmony of youthful patience and ancient wisdom rooted deep in the earth. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but anticipation, knowing this was a test of spirit far beyond brute strength. The unspoken tension between them crystallized as the horse unleashed a sudden surge, hooves beating the ground in defiance. The gunslinger's jaw clenched, controlling. This fury was like trying to hold the desert winds in a fist. Yet it was the Apache boy who stepped closer, moving with a calm born from watching the secrets of nature whispered through rustling leaves and shifting shadows. The boy stretched out a tentative hand, the first act in a delicate dance to breach the silent barricades of the beast's will. As the stallion reared, wild eyes swirling with fire and fear, the gunslinger's gaze hardened. This was more than taming an animal. It was a relentless conflict between domination and understanding, between a man who chased control and a boy who knew how to listen. The air thickened, charged with the raw energy of challenge and fragile hope. Each breath drawn was a quiet prayer that this encounter would not end in broken bodies or shattered dreams. Suddenly, the wild horse halted, ears twitching, as if sensing something old and forgotten. The Apache boy's fingers brushed against the strong, sweat-dampened flank, calmness rippling through him like a healing river. In that fragile instant, a flicker of a bond sparked beneath the scorching sun, unseen by the gunslinger, whose eyes narrowed, sensing a shift in the tide he had not anticipated. The stallion shivered, not from fear, but from a trembling surrender that could either break or bind their fates forever. Many fellow trail riders telling the stories of these wild lands have shared that fate, or that tricky YouTube algorithm sometimes quietly breaks their subscriptions. Before the next perilous path unfolds and a new twist reveals itself, take a quick moment below the video and make sure you're still riding with our band to keep the tale alive. We don't want you to miss any voices echoing from this valley. Check your subscription now and join our saga. The stallion's fiery eyes locked onto the Apache boy with a mixture of fear and challenge, every muscle coiled and ready to burst. The dusty air hung thick between them, heavy with unspoken tension. The gunslinger's hand drifted subtly toward the rifle slung low on his hip, a silent warning to himself of the destruction that might erupt if this fragile moment shattered. But the boy did not flinch, nor did he rush. Instead, his breath slowed, steady as the wind whispering through the mesquite. His fingers traced slow circles in the dust, a ritual he'd learned along creeks and firelit camps, signaling peace to beasts and spirits alike. The stallion's shoulders trembled. Somewhere deep inside, the pulse of wild freedom beat in sync with the boy's calm heartbeat. It was a delicate balance, surrender without submission. Wiping the sweat from his brow, the gunslinger exhaled, his gaze never leaving his prized horse. Years of battles had hardened him, but the raw power in this moment stirred something long buried, a fragile hope that untamed strength might forgive its master. If only for this one day, he whispered under his breath, a word in the language he barely knew, drawn from memory of a fleeting friend he once trusted. The boy's lips moved, a prayer or a call, low enough that only the earth seemed to answer. Slowly, ever so slowly, the stallion lowered its head. The air shifted. A current of fragile understanding, threading between three wills locked in a silent truce. The boy's hand finally touched the horse's neck, fingers trembling, not with fear, but awe, as if bridging two worlds, one born of flesh and iron, the other forged by ancient songs that echoed through the arid plains. A sudden clatter rang out from the far edge of the ranch, the rattle of distant hooves crushing dry dirt, harsh and urgent. The boy's eyes darted toward the horizon, pupils narrowing like eagles before a dive. The gunslinger's jaw tightened. Shadows lengthened beneath the sinking sun, and not all figures approaching bore friendly intentions. "Patrol," the boy said quietly, his voice a low chord of warning. The gunslinger's fingers curled into a fist. Time once vast and forgiving, now compressed into frantic heartbeats. The wild stallion shifted restlessly, sensing the danger it could no longer outrun. This was no longer a test of spirit between boy and beast, but a desperate stand against a threat eager to enforce its cold law. The boy stepped back, his silhouette sharp against the golden haze. "You must ride," he said, an order, a plea tangled in the same breath. "They come for him, for all of us, but you can outrun them. You know these lands better than any." The gunslinger met the boy's eyes, reading the fierce resolve there. Years of solitude and gunfights had taught him to mistrust easy hope. Yet in that steady gaze was a silent promise that this moment could change everything. The dust cloud grew larger, swallowing the horizon's edge like a hungry beast. Figures on horseback emerged, stern faces veiled in stern shadows, uniforms that carried the weight of judgment. The patrol had come to claim more than just the land. They came hunting ghosts, legends they refused to understand. Behind, the wild stallion pawed the earth again, nostrils flaring in rage and fear. The boy's hand lingered a moment longer before pulling away, leaving the horse's spirit tangled between defiance and newfound trust. "Will you ride?" the boy pressed. His voice carried the weight of survival, of hope entwined with desperation. The gunslinger hesitated, feeling the future balance on the edge of this choice. To flee was to preserve what little they had. To stay meant an uncertain reckoning with bullet and blood. But surrender was no option. Not for a spirit this fierce, not for a tale this raw. With a surge, the gunslinger vaulted over the corral's rail, landing beside the stallion. Rough hands found the thick mane, steadying like a lifeline. The beast shuddered, but did not break. Above, the first star. Below, the encroaching shadow. The boy watched, heart tightening as the man climbing onto the wild horse became less hunter, less prisoner, and more a symbol of resistance in a land refusing to bow. As the stallion burst forward, hooves pounding the cracked earth, the patrol's shouts erupted behind, a chorus of relentless pursuit, harsh and unforgiving. Wind tore at the gunslinger's weathered coat as he disappeared beyond the ridge, carrying with him the fragile trust of a young Apache and a fierce hope born beneath scorching sun and ancient skies. But in the fading horizon, a shape detached from the patrol, silent, cloaked not just in dusk, but in secrets older than time. Eyes glinting with cold calculation, it watched the fleeing figure, lips curling in a shadowed smile that promised the coming storm would test not only the wild horse and the gunslinger, but the very soul of the frontier itself. And somewhere deep in the valley, the boy knelt, whispering words the wind would carry far and wide. This is only the beginning. The wild stallion's hooves thundered against the cracked earth as the patrol drew nearer, dust swirling like ghosts across the fading light. The gunslinger gripped the thick mane, muscles straining alongside the beast's raw power, the pounding rhythm beneath him matching the tumult in his chest. Behind him, the silhouette of the Apache boy flickered, a steady shadow against the burning sun, eyes sharp with a storm of worry and courage both. Every breath tasted of desperation. The desert wind carried the distant shouts, harsh commands born of iron will and cold authority. Neither the gunslinger nor the boy dared to look back more than a glance. The stallion surged forward, nostrils flaring, as if fueled by the very fire, threatening to consume their fragile alliance. The man's mind raced. There was no time to ponder mistakes now. Only instinct and the relentless pulse of survival. The weight of years pressing on him, battles won and lost, ghosts of the past etched in scars and silence. But beneath all that, a new force stirred. That boy, silent yet unyielding, had sparked something long dormant, something fierce and stubborn like the land itself. A sharp cry tore through the air. The patrol's lead rider broke from the formation, spurs catching the sun in a flash, eyes locked with cold determination. The chase was no longer a game of distance, but a storm closing in, a reckoning chasing the echoes of freedom. The gunslinger squared his jaw, feeling the stallions tremble as if it too knew the futility of the race. Yet there was no faltering. The boy's quiet hands reaching out before had carved a trail of trust, now binding man and beast, a bond forged beneath merciless skies and whispered legends. It was that slim tether that kept the stallion from bucking, from crushing the fragile hope pulsing between rider and savage spirit. The landscape blurred past in a whirl of ochre and shadow, mesquite thorns flashing by like knives, dry brush snapping beneath wild hooves, the endless plains folding like pages of a half-remembered myth. The gunslinger's thoughts, sharp and fragmented, clung to the moment. If they could just reach the river's edge, perhaps the thick willows and bending currents might hide them, shield their defiance from the patrol's ruthless gaze. But the patrol was cunning. Their calloused hands had brushed blood and betrayal, turning cold justice into an unforgiving hunt. The gunslinger remembered stories whispered among weary riders, men swallowed by the land for less than this, legends lost beneath dust and time. He wouldn't become one of those echoes, not while breath still fought in his lungs, not when that boy's gaze held silent promises. A sudden yelp startled them both, a shot cracking like thunder, a bullet sparking off a distant rock just beyond reach. The stallion flinched, muscles taut. The gunslinger leaned low, whispering a torrent of half-remembered words, prayers tangled in grit and fire. "Hold fast," he rasped, voice rough as the desert stone. "Hold fast, old friend." Behind them, a wave of shouting grew louder, and figures swirled like vengeful shadows, their mercy long since lost to the cruelty woven into law. There was no room for kindness here, no space for misunderstanding or hope. Only the stark clarity of survival or ruin. Then, a sudden cut through the chaos, a snake coiled in the sand along the path. The stallion's muscles coiled instinctively, veering sharply. The gunslinger's heart hammered, grabbing tightly as the beast dodged with fiery grace. That moment's gamble won them precious seconds. Seconds enough to see, half hidden in the swirling dust. The boys sprinting from the edge of the ranch, a makeshift bow clenched tight, eyes burning with fierce determination. "Head for the ravine," the boy shouted, voice slicing through the din. "We lose them there." The gunslinger barely nodded, pulses pounding louder than the wild hooves. The ravine was narrow, jagged, a trap for the unwary, a refuge for the desperate. The patrol would hesitate, forced to navigate its treacherous paths, buying time to disappear into the embrace of the land. The stallion's speed surged, legs pumping like pistons, muscles screaming beneath the relentless sun. Dust and grit coated their faces, breaths ragged and sharp. The gunslinger's fingers bled from gripping the worn leather reins. Sweat coursed down his brow, mingling with dirt and resolve. They reached the ravine's mouth, just as the first pursuers slammed their horses into slower strides, wary of the rocky descent. The gunslinger urged his mount down the steep slope with careful fury, hooves sliding, heart leaping like a bird desperate for sky. The stallion's wild eyes reflected the jagged stones below, but the trust between rider and beast held firm. Darkness crept in as shadows gathered between the ravine's walls. The gunslinger caught his breath, eyes flickering back up to the ridge. The patrol's mounted shapes flitted like vultures, cursing the narrowing path, the wildness that refused to be tamed. Behind him, the boy appeared at the ravine's top, hands gripping rough edges, face pale but unyielding. Their eyes met for a heartbeat, a silent communion of resolve and unspoken fears. A promise carved in the heat of the chase. Survival was no longer just about running, but about standing against the storm yet to come. Suddenly, a sharp whistle pierced the cracked air, a signal from the patrol, echoing like a knife against stone. The gunslinger's gaze snapped upward to a shadow detaching itself from the ridge. A man cloaked in dust and menace, eyes hard as flint. He carried a rifle and a smirk that spoke of cruelties yet to be unmasked. The gunslinger's breath hitched. This was no mere hunter. This was a reckoning, the embodiment of the frontier's darkest truths. The boy's voice, steady but low, cut through the tension. "He knows your name." The stallion shivered beneath him, sensing the coming tempest, as did the man astride it. The horizon spilled fire and blood. The trail they had chased was far from over, and somewhere in the swirling dusk, where land and shadow bled together, a new threat stepped quietly forward, whispering promises written in iron and smoke. A storm that would reshape their fates and test the fragile trust between an Apache boy, a gunslinger, and a wild, untamable spirit. This land won't give up its secrets so easily. The stallion's hooves thundered against the cracked earth, muscles coiled beneath a wild mane that caught the dying sunlight like a flame flaring against twilight. The gunslinger hugged the beast's powerful neck, senses sharp and heart pounding in fierce rhythm with the pounding ground. Dust billowed behind them, swallowing the fading cries from the patrol closing fast, their mounted forms spitting vengeance across the barren plains. Ahead, the narrow ravine yawned like a dark wound in the earth, jagged walls looming, riddled with shadows that promised refuge, yet whispered of peril. The boy's urgent command echoed sharp and clear. "Head for the ravine. We lose them there." The gunslinger's lips pressed into a hard line as the stallion dug deep, muscles rippling, hooves striking stone with desperate precision. Every winding turn demanded agility born of trust. The fragile thread spun between man and beast, between the gunslinger's battle-scarred hands and the untamed spirit beneath him. The ravine's jagged bones scraped the underbelly of the stallion, and a sudden slip sent a shower of stones tumbling downward. The gunslinger's breath caught and heart lurched, but the stallion corrected, eyes blazing with fierce defiance, as if daring the land itself to break them. The chase grew closer, voices snarling like wolves at their heels, the crack of rifles punctuating the thinning light. Behind, the Apache boy ran at the edge, bow in hand, breath ragged but steady, eyes aflame with something beyond fear. A promise, a silent fury born from knowledge stitched to ancient melodies. Each step was a drumbeat, calling for survival, for defiance, for a hope that neither the desert's scorch nor mankind's cruelty could snuff out. The gunslinger's mind raced, not with strategy, but memories born from decades of narrow escapes and bitter losses. He felt the boy's presence like a shadow, tethering him to something better, something unyielding amid the wreckage of old grudges and brutal law. Suddenly, the chase faltered. The patrol's lead horses slowed, hooves skidding against loose stone, unsure in the narrowing canyon. The gunslinger dared to glance back, eyes cutting through the dust-streaked air. The patrol's faces were grim, but their movements betraying growing hesitation. The ravine was both trap and sanctuary, a battlefield where cunning might turn the tide. Ahead, the boy halted at a jagged bend. His stance was fierce, spear in hand, eyes scanning the ridge above with the cold calculation of a young warrior raised on legend and loss. "They'll try to block us," he warned, voice low yet ringing with authority. From above, a shadow moved, a dark slither against reddening skies. The gunslinger tensed, senses taut as bowstrings. A figure broke from the ridge's crest, tall, dust-wrapped, eyes sharp as flint, a cruel smirk prying across his weathered face. In his hands, a rifle gleamed like the promise of death. "He's here," the boy said without turning. "The man who spills blood for sport. The one who writes justice in cold steel." The gunslinger felt the weight of that name settle like a stone in his gut. He knew the kind, merciless trackers twisted by bitter vendettas, who saw the Apache and the restless frontier as pests to be eradicated without mercy. His gaze flicked to the stallion. Beneath the beast's wild eyes lay exhaustion and an unspoken bond born of desperate trust. This ride was no longer just flight. It was defiance. "Hold him," muttered the gunslinger, his voice ragged but firm. "If he wants to end this chase, he'll have to pass through me first." The stallion snorted, a raw, primal sound filled with fire and fury. Their flight through the ravine had been a gambit, but now the gunslinger readied himself for the reckoning that awaited beyond the canyon's mouth. The boy nocked an arrow, fingers steady even as his chest heaved. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of mesquite and sagebrush, mingled now with the unmistakable copper tang of blood yet to flow, and the bitter smoke of past battles unforgotten. The patrol's figures pressed forward, rough voices rising like thunder, a tide of unforgiving law and vengeance closing in on a land that resisted every claim, every conquest. The gunslinger tugged leather reins, coaxing the stallion to quicken, eyes narrowed against the gathering night. He felt the joint pulse of boy, beast, and man, locked in a struggle older than any law etched on paper. A sudden whistle from the ridge sliced the air, a signal sharp and cold. The man with the rifle advanced, stepping into a patch of dying light. His gaze fixed like steel on the gunslinger, lips curling into a smile that twisted hope into dread. Shots cracked in ragged bursts, the bullets singing death's song as the chase erupted into brutal close quarters. The stallion reared, hooves striking air, eyes wild with panic, and yet yielding just enough to the rider's will. A dance on the brink of chaos. Behind, the boy loosed an arrow, its flight a streak of defiance toward the encroaching shadows. The patrol faltered as steel met bone, and for a brief heartbeat, the furious pulse of survival surged. But then the rider caught a glimpse of movement, something unseen, something darker, slinking at the edge of the fray. A figure cloaked not just in dust, but in secrets. The gunslinger's eyes locked onto that figure. Time slowed. The new threat stepped forward, lips quirked with ominous promise. "This land won't give up its secrets so easily," he whispered, voice dripping like venom, etched by years of bitter reckoning. The stallion snorted, rearing once more, breath trembling as the first cold gust of night swept through the ravine. And somewhere beneath that smothering sky, the Apache boy's voice broke the tumult, steady and low. The real fight is only beginning. The stallion's sudden halt sent a spray of dust into the dying light, nostrils flaring as if sensing the weight of unseen eyes pressing upon them. The patrol's shouts bounced off the jagged walls of the ravine, bitter and close now, a relentless drumbeat echoing in the gunslinger's chest. His grip on the reins tightened, fingers white with effort, matching the tense knot forming deep in his gut. The beast beneath him trembled, muscles taut but responsive, the years of wild freedom clashing with this newfound possession. Behind the veil of approaching darkness, the Apache boy crouched low atop the ridge, breath shallow but steady, bow drawn with practiced ease. His eyes scanned every shadow, every rustle, seeking in the territory's ancient language the rhythm of danger and hope. Every sinew in his young body ached with urgency, years of quiet patience now raging like fire within. A sudden movement caught his eye, a flicker beyond the scrub, a figure slipping with the silent menace of a predator. The man with the rifle paused briefly on the ridge's crest, lips curling into a cruel smirk that carved itself like a scar through the fading light. This was not a killing driven solely by law. It was vengeance written in cold steel, hunger cloaked in unforgiving justice. Below, the gunslinger's steadying breath was barely audible. His mind raced, not to find an escape now, but to carve a path of defiance. The wild horse he rode was no mere instrument. It was a living thunderstorm beneath him, wild sinews singing their pact of trust and rebellion. The boy's earlier touch was still vivid in his memory, delicate, unyielding, a barrier forged in whispered peace that neither the patrol's hatred nor the harsh winds could erode. But the canyon offered no sanctuary now. The narrowing walls pressed close, the sharp rocks threatening to shatter both horse and rider in an instant of misstep. Time had compressed, the air thick with the electric charge of imminent confrontation. The first shot shattered the tense silence, spitting stones at the edge of the trail. The stallion jolted violently, hooves skidding on loose gravel, muscles trembling like the beat of a war drum tuned to desperation. The gunslinger leaned forward, voice low and raw against the wild wind. "Hold steady. Hold on." His words were less for the beast than for himself, a prayer cast into the gathering shadows. From above, the boy loosed an arrow, a swift streak cutting through the amber gloom. It found flesh. The sharp cry of a pursuing horse sliced briefly the patrol's relentless chorus. The men faltered, cursing with bitter rage as fury mingled with fear. The narrow ravine had become a crucible, the stake set high between survival and annihilation. The gunslinger urged the stallion onwards, each hoofbeat a desperate promise to outpace the doom closing around them. Sweat and dust plastered his face, but his eyes blazed with stubborn fire, a restless soul refusing to be tamed by cold chains or cruel fate. Within the taut rhythm of flight, a silent understanding wove between man, boy, and beast, the fragile thread of trust born beneath blistering skies and whispered legends. A sudden snap echoed, a branch breaking under heavy boots. The patrol was splitting. One group pressing the chase, another preparing an ambush further ahead. The gunslinger spotted them mid-turn. Figures crouching behind boulders, rifles trained like hawks, waiting to strike. A shadow slipped from their midst. A taller man, his face hidden beneath a battered hat, eyes gleaming with merciless intent. The gunslinger felt the weight of that gaze settle like a stone upon his chest. This was a hunter unlike any he'd faced, a merciless predator whose hunger for control was matched only by his disregard for life. The boy's voice pierced the tension, low and resolute. He is the one who wouldn't stop at death. The broken law, the fear made flesh. The words carried the weight of old wounds, whispered cautions in a language carved by blood. The unspoken truth lay thick in the heavy air. Here, in the narrowing ravine, choices burned brighter than bullets. Fight and risk death, or flee and live haunted by chains of guilt. The stallion, sensing the shift, reared, trampling the hard-packed earth beneath, with fiery rebellion. The gunslinger planted both feet in the stirrups, as if to bind himself to the wildness beneath. The boy's arrow snapped again, a warning, fired precisely toward the advancing ambush. Momentum shattered by sudden violence. Bullets tore through thin air, whistling cries born of hate and command. The stallion lunged sideways, hooves striking harsh stone as the gunslinger yanked the reins sharply, his face set in grim determination. Each evasive twist was a dance on a razor's edge. One false move would mean ruin. Behind them, the patrol surged forward, voices rising in a savage chorus, broken only by the harsh commands and the relentless beating of exhausted hooves. The gunslinger sensed the narrowing noose tightening, a trap wrought of man's cruelty and nature's wrath. Above, a crackling in the brush drew his gaze. Another figure, cloaked in dust yet moving with an eerie grace, emerged unseen by their pursuers. His eyes gleamed with chilling calculation, lips curved in a shadowy smile. The gunslinger felt the air thicken, the first breath of a storm that carried not just lead and gunfire, but treacheries far older, woven deep into the soil and sky. The boy's voice broke through the maelstrom, steady and low. Watch the shadow, the one who waits beyond death's edge. The gunslinger's pulse thundered as the stallion surged forward, one last time, muscles burning, will screaming against the coming void. The chase was a symphony of desperation and hope, each heartbeat a drumbeat against surrender. But as the ravine swallowed their fleeting stride, the gunslinger's gaze caught the shadow's figure, separating from the darkening line, stepping forward silently, a specter bearing secrets darker than any gunshot. And in that charged moment, with the sun bleeding below the horizon and the dust closing like a tomb, the gunslinger knew this was no longer just a fight for freedom. It was a reckoning with the very soul of the land, a battle that would demand every ounce of courage, trust, and fire they still held. The shadow drew his breath, voice like the hiss of a serpent. "You've run far enough." But the gunslinger, clutching the mane of the wild stallion, whispered back with fierce defiance, eyes blazing beneath the dying light. "This land still remembers the cries of the broken, and soon so will you." Dust whipped fiercely into the settling twilight as the wild stallion thundered through the narrowing ravine. Hooves struck sharp against jagged rocks, each step a pulse of raw power and desperation beneath the gunslinger's steady grip. His breath came ragged, lungs burning with every gasp, sweat and dust mixing on weathered skin. The air itself seemed to crackle with tension, thick with the churning storm of hunters closing fast behind. The patrol's voices echoed like raging thunder, relentless and unforgiving, spitting sharp commands into the tense silence of the canyon. The gunslinger perched between survival and sacrifice. Youth and ancient wisdom laced tight in his steely gaze. Every breath he drew was an invocation to the land's secret forces, an invocation older than the settler's chains or the gunslinger's hard-earned scars. The stallion veered sharply, nostrils flared, sensing a hidden threat lying in wait among the shadows. Rocks shifted beneath pounding hooves as the rider leaned low, guiding the beast through the treacherous path carved by centuries of forgotten fury. One misstep could shatter bond and body alike. Suddenly, a crack. A cigarette-popping rifle shot exploded just feet to the right, sending a shower of gravel cascading down the canyon walls. The stallion jerked violently, muscles taut as a coiled spring, eyes wild yet tethered to the faint, unyielding thread of trust binding rider and beast. The gunslinger's jaw clenched, his voice a gravelly whisper in the storm. "Hold fast, old friend, hold fast." From above, the boy's arrow sang a cutting arc through the thickening dusk, burying itself with deadly accuracy into the flank of a charging pursuit horse. The rider cried out, the formation faltering amid curses and rising panic. That breath, fragile as dawn, is all that separated hunter from prey. The gunslinger's throat tightened, heart pounding with the raw ache of hope born in the shadows of despair. The ravine forced the pursuers to scatter. Some balls of fury pressed forward. Others hesitated behind protective rock fissures, rifles aimed and waiting. The narrow corridor was both a shield and a trap, carved deep by wind and time, demanding cunning and steel in equal measure. A sudden rustle jerked the gunslinger's attention skyward. A figure detached from the silhouetted ridge, a ruthless man cloaked in dust and menace. His smile was a cruel slash beneath battered hat brim, eyes burning cold with merciless intent. He raised a rifle smooth and practiced, the barrel catching one last light that seemed to curse the dying sun itself. The boy's voice, low and steady, despite the roaring chaos, struck like a blade. He's the one who hunts like a shadow, spills blood for sport, and haunts the land with broken laws. The gunslinger felt the weight settle heavy on his soul. He knew that look, the merciless hunger of a man who'd carved his name by terror and fear, who viewed the APACHE and restless spirits of the plains as nothing but vermin to be eradicated. The stallion's powerful muscles tensed beneath him, sensing the approaching doom, shaking with a wild defiance that echoed decades of survival, fought tooth and nail against a world that refused to bow. "Brace yourself," the gunslinger growled, voice raw from dust and war. "If he wants an end, he'll find a reckoning first." The stallion snorted, a furnace of fury bursting through its flaring nostrils. Together, man and beast danced on the razor's edge, speed and skill blended with raw will. The boy knocked another arrow, breath steady despite pounding heart. The mesquite and sagebrush carried the scent of blood and smoke, an ancient promise of survival twisted into the present. Gunfire tore the stillness, bullets hissing past through jagged air. The stallion reared, hooves striking invisible foes as the gunslinger yanked the reins hard. Twisting there, fate on the brink of chaos. Each avoidance a desperate gamble. One falter and ruin would claim them swiftly. Behind, the patrol surged, a vicious hurricane of law and vengeance. The gunslinger's eyes caught a flicker in the corner. A shadow, darker than nightfall itself, slipping from the brush with eerie grace and purpose. His eyes gleamed sharp, lips curved in a knowing, wicked smile. Cold dread coiled in the gunslinger's chest as the boy's voice cut through the maelstrom, calm but laden with warning. "Watch the shadow, the one who waits for death's edge." The stallion surged forward once more, muscles burning with fierce rebellion. The gunslinger's grip tightened like iron, defiance blazing beneath stars flickering awake in the cooling sky. This chase had become more than flight. It was a defiant stand against the darkness tightening around them. As the ravine swallowed their flight, the gunslinger's gaze locked on the shadow's advancing form, a silent specter, bearing secrets deeper and darker than any bullet wound. And as the last light bled from the sky, the boy's whispered words echoed long and low into the rising night. "This land still has its hunters, and tonight one of them steps from the shadows." The stallion's breath came in ragged bursts, mingling with the heavy pulse of dust stirred by pounding hooves. The gunslinger's grip tightened with every thundering step. Each strike against the cracked earth, a heartbeat that tethered man and beast in desperate harmony. Ahead, the jagged ravine yawned like a scar across the land, a dark fissure cutting through endless sun-baked plains, promising refuge and peril in equal measure. The boy's voice echoed sharp from the ridge, a beacon in the rising dusk. "Hold the path! Don't lose them here!" The gunslinger's eyes flicked upward for a heartbeat, catching the boy's steady silhouette, framed by fading gold and shadow. There, in that steadfast figure, carved by years of silence and survival, was a promise older than gunfire, a quiet strength threading the raw edges of fear and hope. He could see the tension coiling in the boy's jaw, the fierce determination warring against the fatigue in his gaze. Behind them, the patrol loomed like a living storm, boots and hooves carving rage into the earth. Their shouts tore through the hollow canyon, sharp commands punctuated by the metallic clang of rifles sliding free. The man leading the hunt, the smirk still fresh in the gunslinger's mind, was not content to simply chase. He wanted a reckoning, a final word written in blood. The stallion whinnied, ears pinned back, muscles rippling with a ferocity born of wild years and newfound trust. The gunslinger leaned forward, his voice a low rasp barely louder than the dusk wind swirling around them. "Keep steady. This land remembers the ones who run and the ones who fight." A shot cracked like thunder, and the stallion reared, hooves clawing at the unforgiving stone. Nostrils flared wide as panic and defiance collided. The gunslinger's hands found the mane, a lifeline rooted in sweat and grit, soothing the beast's frayed nerves with steady pressure. From the ridge, the boy loosed another arrow, the sharp hiss slicing through the tightening silence before embedding itself in horseflesh. A rider cried out, spurs catching errant light as they faltered, cursing bitterly as their formations splintered. The patrol's fierce momentum wavered, just enough. The gunslinger heart thundered, riding that narrow edge between salvation and ruin. Ahead, the walls of the ravine curved tight, forcing horses to jostle and stumble. The gunslinger's thoughts sharpened to a single blade. If they could navigate this twisted corridor, the shadows might cloak them, and the thickets beyond could swallow even the most ruthless pursuer. Survival was the fragile thread they clung to, a thread now woven by the boy's steady hands and the stallion's fiery spirit, stitching together man, beast, and childhood fate. A sudden gust rattled dry leaves, and a silhouette slipped from the rocky ledge, a cold phantom cloaked in dust and cruelty. The gunslinger caught the flash of hard eyes and a knife-edged smile that spoke of merciless intent. This was no mere hunter chasing ghosts. This was the final tempest stalking their fragile alliance. The boy's voice broke through the heavy air, low but fierce. "He knows your name, and he knows what you carry in your soul." The gunslinger felt that weight settle like a stone in his chest, a silent reckoning thrust upon his ribs. Years forged by gunsmoke and narrow escapes dissolved into the burning truth of this moment. The chase was far from over. The land around him held memories darker than any bullet scar, and the shadows had teeth hungry for bones. He urged the stallion forward, muscles coiling in fiery defiance. His voice came rough and resolute, a vow whispered beneath a sky bleeding into night. This land will remember the courage of the broken and the fury of those who refuse to bow. The stallion snorted, a fierce wind itself, wild and unbroken, charging into upcoming darkness. Together, man and beast crossed the threshold of dusk, racing not just against death, but toward a destiny etched in fire and blood. Behind them, the patrol's voices rose to a harsh crescendo, the sound of judgment riding in on cold leather and cold steel. But through the shadows, unseen and silent, the dark stranger advanced, a living whisper of vengeance and secret storms yet to break. And as the last golden light slipped beyond rocky heights, the boy's steady voice carried on the wind, sharp and unyielding. This land holds shadows deeper than the night, and one just stepped out to claim us all. The stallion's hooves struck the rough earth in unyielding rhythm. Fiery eyes locked ahead where the ravine yawned, a chasm of shadows and jagged stone that promised either salvation or ruin. The gunslinger's breath burned in his throat, each inhale a ragged prayer to warn spirits he barely believed in anymore. Behind him, the patrol surged like a storm, relentless and jagged, voices sharp as gunshots, carried low on the drying wind. The Apache boy crouched on the ridge's edge, low and unmoving, his bowstring taut in patient defiance. His gaze sliced through the swirling dust, calculating every twist where danger might strike hardest. The sun, dying in the west, painted his face in broken gold and shadow. Youth strained with the weight of knowledge older than the land itself. A crack split the air. A rifle's cold report spat shards of stone beside the stallion's galloping path. The beast flinched, muscles snapping tight like steel cables. But the trust, forged in earlier moments, held fast beneath the gunslinger's steady hands. The faint pressure of the boy's presence in his blood echoed like a heartbeat, anchoring him to this impossible alliance born between wild freedom and fragile hope. The pursuers faltered briefly, unsteady in the narrowing corridor of the ravine, where every step risked a stumble to death. The gunslinger's mind snapped sharply to the precarious line they trod, a fractured contract between man, horse, and the unforgiving earth. Ahead, the boy stood as a silent sentinel, shadow and flame, ready to turn the land itself into a weapon with a single arrow's flight. "Hold the center," the boy's voice sliced. Through the murmurs of the wind, low but unwavering, "They'll come for us in force where the walls close." The gunslinger nodded grimly, eyes glinting with cold fire. Years of scars and skirmishes taught him fear, but never surrender. The stallion's wild spirit beneath him hummed, a fierce resonance born from ancient songs woven into this endless soil. They were running from death, yet each thunderous stride echoed resistance. Another shot ripped through the Fin Canyon air, an arrow from the boy, swift and certain, embedding with sickening accuracy in the flank of a charging pursuer's mount. The startled cry shattered the pursuer's formation, sowing chaos where discipline had once ruled. Time stretched taut, a knife edge splitting past and future. The gunslinger pressed forward, muscles burning, sweat and dust mingling like ghosts upon his sun-cracked skin. The stallion dipped, dodging the fallen boulder, then lunged with fearless grace, carrying the rider deeper into the ravine's maw. The narrowing walls embraced them like the jaws of an ancient beast, unforgiving and dark. From the twisting shadows above, a figure detached, tall, dust-wrapped, eyes gleaming hard as flint beneath a battered brim. His cruel smile cut sharp against the fading light, rifle poised with familiar menace. The gunslinger's pulse clenched as recognition struck cold. The one who never falters, who hunts not for law, but for blood, the boy murmured, voice edged with bitter warning. The gunslinger's grip tightened, knuckles blanched white on the reins. This was no simple chase. It was a reckoning. The ravenous hunger in the man's eyes was the price the frontier charged for freedom. Here, beneath the bruised sky, no mercy lived, only the cold calculus of survival, measured in lead and bone. The stallion snorted, a raw, wild sound, bursting forth like a battle cry. The gunslinger leaned low, whispering hoarsely, "If he wants this fight, he'll have to face me first." The boy knocked another arrow, steady hands trembling, only with the weight of what was to come. The wind stirred again, thick with the scent of desert sage and blood yet spilled, a warning woven into the dying light. Suddenly, gunfire shattered the charged silence, bullets hissing like venom in the narrowing gap. The stallion reared, front hooves raking at empty sky, eyes blazing terror and fierce submission all at once. The gunslinger yanked the reins hard, forcing the beast to pivot on the edge of a tremor that could slam them to ruin. The boy's arrow flew, a deadly streak defiant against the encroaching shadows, striking a pursuing rider with a clean, sharp thud. The ambush broke apart, cries and curses mixing in the darkening canyon air. The fugitives twisted through the wild terrain like desperate spirits, refusing to be claimed. Yet beneath that desperate dance, a darker movement slithered, silent, unseen but deadly. From the cliffs above, a shadow detached itself from the gathering night. Cloaked in dust and silence, eyes cold as the ravine's stone, it moved with lethal grace. The gunslinger caught the flicker of a wicked smile beneath shadows deeper than the coming dark. The boy's voice cut through the chaos, calm and fierce, a thunderclap of warning. The shadow waits beyond the edge of death. The gunslinger's heart slammed against his ribs, breath caught in the silent tightening of a noose woven by fate and cruelty. The stallion surged forward, muscles ablaze with savage resolve, the land beneath them singing the old song of defiance. Behind them, the patrol roared in frustrated fury, a storm of cold steel and broken laws converging on a desperate hope. And as the last flush of sunset bled into endless night, the shadow stepped forward, silent, inevitable. A darkness older than any gun. The gunslinger's voice dropped to a growl beneath the rising stars. This land will remember every lost soul, and tonight, a new shadow claims its due. The chill of night crept swiftly into the ravine, swallowing the last embers of sunset and painting the jagged walls in shadows deep as old wounds. The gunslinger's grip steadied on the stallion's mane, muscles taut, senses alert to every whisper of wind and shifting dust. The wild horse's breaths came heavy but controlled. Trust forged in the burning light, now tested in the cold embrace of coming darkness. Ahead, the silhouette of the man with the rifle emerged sharply from the rocky ridge, a grim specter framed by the stars beginning to pierce the sky. His cruel smile held the weight of cruel intent, the reckless hunger of a hunter who had stalked too long in the wilderness of lawlessness. Behind him, the patrol's ragged voices faded into uneasy silence, sensing the tense calm that hovered before the inevitable storm. The Apache boy's figure stood unwavering atop the ridge, bow lowered, eyes steady beneath the worn brim of his hat. Every muscle in his young body coiled like the bowstring that once taught him patience and precision. He glanced at the gunslinger. An unspoken vow passed between them, forged in fire, blood, and fragile hope. The man with the rifle took a deliberate step forward, planting his boots on the uneven stone, unlocking the deadly calm with a voice rough and cold. This land's stories end tonight. No more legends, no more ghosts. The gunslinger's eyes narrowed, flicking to the stallion's restless eyes, then back to the hunter. His voice was a low growl, steadied despite the racing pulse beating beneath scarred ribs. There's no end to the stories written in these plains, not while courage rides still and the land remembers. From the shadows, the boy stepped forward, shoulders square, the steady hum of generations in his steady breath. You come for blood and law, but this ground answers only to truth. The hunter laughed then, a harsh sound, like dry bones cracking. Truth? The only truth here is power, and I hold the gun. Steel flashed as he raised the rifle, aimed with deadly purpose. In that moment, time stretched taut across the ravine, but past and present pulling tight like horse reins, gripped by fate itself. Without hesitation, the gunslinger shifted his weight. Pressing down with hardened legs, the stallion sprang forward, hooves striking stone and dust in roaring defiance. The animal's wild spirit surged, but beneath the fury lay that fragile bond, the boy's touch, the years of quiet understanding, guiding the beast past rage into purpose. The hunter fired. The rifle cracked like thunder, a bullet, singing a path just wide. The gunslinger leaned low, the stallion weaving with fluid grace that was almost dance. Answers learned from decades wrestling with wildness on the edge of civilization. From the ridge, the boy's arrow flew, a sharp whisper through the night air, cutting clean to find flesh. The hunter's smug smile faltered, the rifle lowering as a wound etched swift and severe. The pause shattered the hunter's certainty, and rage flickered wild in his eyes. He cursed, stepping back to reload, but the fragile advantage was lost as the gunslinger closed the distance, lowered his rifle slowly, matching fire with fire, a testament not of surrender, but of relentless resolve. Behind them, the Apache boy descended, eyes scanning the canyon's dark corners for any sign of another threat. His arrow quiver hung empty, save for the last worn shaft, a symbol of battles fought with honor and untold courage. "End it," the boy whispered, voice barely carrying, "not with death, but with reckoning." The gunslinger nodded once, voice gruff yet resolute. Let this be a warning carried on the winds. The frontier does not forget, and it does not forgive. The hunter's breath ragged, eyes wild with fading menace, slowly lowered the rifle and stepped back into the black shadows from which he came, a predator driven from the kill by a force older than bullets and bone. The patrol followed, melting into the cold silence of night, their fury humbled, for now, but battles far from done. A deep exhale escaped the gunslinger as he shifted in the saddle. The stallion, sensing the lull, stepped forward deliberately, standing tall amidst the settling quiet, powerful and unbroken. The boy approached slowly, hands extended in peace, not just to man, but to beast. A silent ceremony binding the fractured edges of fierce freedom and hard-won trust. Together, beneath the expansive sky glittering with stars like distant fires, they forged a fragile peace, a covenant written not in bloodshed, but in understanding and hope. The frontier was vast and merciless, but here, in this quiet ravine, it whispered a new song, one where boy and gunslinger, Apache and wild stallion, carried forward the ancient dream of freedom, a dream that every dawn might yet break with the promise of a land that remembered not only the cries of the broken, but the courage of those who dared to ride its wild heart. The gunslinger cast one last look across the horizon, where the first light of a new day pressed against the dark. His voice, hoarse but steady, broke the solemn stillness. This is not the end. It's the beginning of a new path. The boy smiled faintly, eyes reflecting the dawn's fragile glow. And as the sun slipped slowly over rugged mesas, the three, man, boy, and stallion, stood united in the silence, a living testament that even the wildest shadows could yield to light. The valley held its breath, and for once, it was a breath carried by hope.